I recently visited a first of its kind exhibit in New York City, a full scale replica of Anne Frank's hiding place during World War II. I had the opportunity to speak to Michael Glickman, who was key to this exhibit coming to the United States. And what you're about to see is a behind the scenes interview I conducted with Michael. I wasn't planning on sharing the full conversation, maybe just a few sound bites here and there. But as I listened to it, preparing for our first piece on the exhibit, I felt like you would really enjoy it as is and learn a lot like I did. Here's Michael.
So I'm the former director of the Center for Jewish History and the former director of New York's Holocaust Museum, and have a long friendship and association with the director of the Anne Frank House. And we started having a conversation in February of 2024, talking about what it could be to do a major exhibition on Anne here in New York.
How did you feel called to do this work?
I've been doing this for now almost a quarter century, and this has been my career. It's been something that I have grown to become passionate by. Spent just over 13 years here at the center, and then spent some years working in the Holocaust Museum, and for the last 6 years have really focused on how do we tell the story of the Jewish people by connecting philanthropy and institutions around the world. Getting my doctorate right now on the future of sustainability for Jewish museums in the US. So this has become a bit of a calling.
And is that because of any family history?
No.
It's just you just feel called to do it.
I felt called to do it. I showed up here in 2002, and essentially this became my career.
So many questions about the exhibit. First of all, for someone that isn't able to see this now or hasn't come yet, could you just describe what they're seeing?
Sure. So Anne Frank, the exhibition, is an exploration of 100 years of history. You enter in New York in 1909, and you essentially exit the exhibition with the last artifact, which is the 75th edition of the diary published in English in 2024. And so between that time period of 1909 to 2024, you're getting introduced to the family. You're understanding how Otto and Edith became a couple, how the girls Margot and Anne were born, what life was like when things were good in Frankfurt for them. Their forced migration to Amsterdam in 1933, 1934. What was happening both in Germany and then Austria and then around Europe in the 1930s. And how the family lived under Nazi occupation from May of 1940 until July of 1942, when Margot Frank was called to a German labor camp and they were forced to go into hiding. We travel with the family through the 5 rooms of the secret annex, and we meet the others who go into hiding with them, the Von Pells and then Fritz Pfeffer. We get an understanding of what life was like for those 2 years where they couldn't leave that space, where they had to be, where they lived in fear, essentially, of being found out, and where their life was really quite challenged. We then understand what happens when they were arrested. They're sent to prison. They're sent to Westerbork in the north of the country, which was a transit camp. And then they're put on the last transport out of the Netherlands, to Auschwitz. We then get an introduction to what happened to the 6 million Jews in Europe who were murdered, including 1.5 million Jewish children. And we start to explore Europe in a way that you get introduced to the ghettos and you get introduced to how life was changing. But I would say as important is you're walking through the entire continent over this illuminated glass floor where you're seeing the borders and boundaries of every European country, and you're getting introduced to 44,000 concentration camps, 1,500 mass extermination sites, and 1,000 major slave labor camps. This is the experience of European Jewry. You then get to understand how the Nazis came up with the final solution, how places like Auschwitz and Sobibor and Majdanek were turned into extermination camps, and what happened to the 8 people in hiding, Otto Frank being the sole survivor, liberated by the Red Army on January 27th, 1945 from Auschwitz, and the other 7 who were with him, including his wife and his daughters, the other family, and Fritz Pfeffer, all of them murdered in various camps. We then travel with Otto through Europe as from the point of liberation until his return to Amsterdam on June 3rd, 1945. We understand how he comes to learn of the death of his wife and his daughters and the others. We see how he publishes the diary initially, and that first edition in 1947 in Dutch. And then we get introduced to all of the various aspects of what is this legacy. Broadway, Hollywood, tens of millions of copies of the diary sold, and 79 editions of the translated diary where we put every single one of them on view. That is the exhibition.
That is really incredible. And seeing the letter, the rejection letter from one of the American publishers saying, we don't think it's going to sell.
And that it didn't have any literary value as they were reviewing it. And so every American publisher from 1947 until Doubleday agreed to publish in 1952 rejected the diary. So the letter that we have on view is from Viking Press, who essentially stated that it didn't have any literary value and that they didn't believe they could turn a profit. One of the most published books in history now, of course, and certainly one of the most translated and far-reaching. And so I suspect that whoever signed that letter, and you can't quite see what the signature is, that is a person who maybe has understood a little bit of regret. Maybe that regret turned into generational regret in some way.
It's a testimony to also the fortitude of Otto and others to keep the story going. I mean, it was almost undeniable after it got published for the first time. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? I know I want to get back to the exhibit, but what do you know about that first year of the book being published and what happened next?
So, I mean, Otto read every word of Anne's writings, and she wanted to be a published author. She wanted to be a journalist. She wanted to make her way to Hollywood. He committed himself to making sure that that story got told and that the legacy of his daughter and his other daughter and his wife continued to be part of the narrative in the story. Anne's diary was among the first accounts of testimony, to some extent, of course, right? We are brought through 1944, and obviously that's when the diary stops. So we have the diary from June 12 of 1942, where she receives it on her 13th birthday, and she's writing until the summer of 1944. This is one of the first times that a public is able to understand what life was like for those who were being persecuted and struggling and suffering. Otto dedicated every ounce of his fiber to be able to ensure that that story saw a public audience.
What do we see here in this exhibit that we only see here in the United States that doesn't exist in Amsterdam, where the annex is still preserved?
So the Anne Frank House is one of the most visited historical sites in the world. 1.2 million visitors a year, sold out all but, I think, 9 days a year. It's an incredible experience. It's the authenticity and the of place, and it's being able to walk through those hollowed rooms in a way where you get to still feel and hear and smell what was happening during those 2 really difficult years. We give you a more comprehensive story here in New York, and the idea for us was just recreating the experience of Amsterdam wasn't going to be sufficient for an American audience in terms of, we know that some people have been there and they've seen it and they've had that experience, but how do we do something more comprehensively? And so we're taking you through the arc of this journey of the family, how they come together, how they end up where they end up, what are the experiences that they're having, good, bad, and awful. And we're really we were very intentional about how that story gets told from the start to the finish. So you're getting a more comprehensive view. You're also getting 130 original objects and artifacts. These are aspects of family history that just are not told in Amsterdam or in other places around the world.
What are some of those artifacts that you see here?
First thing that you see when you walk in is Otto's travel trunk, which he brings to New York in 1909 when he comes to work with Nathan Strauss, who is the son of the founder of Macy's. They meet in Heidelberg in Germany, where they're studying art history together. Otto comes to New York and starts working with him at Macy's and getting an introduction to what American life is like. So that travel trunk is a piece of history that really, it traveled across the Atlantic with Otto multiple times. He goes back to Frankfurt in 1911. We get to see a bridal chest, which had been in the family for hundreds of years, generations passed down. We see Edith's china. We get to see a photo of Margot and Edith's parents when she's about 6 months old, 1927. there are aspects of what's on view that are just not the sort of things that you would expect to see. You see the gramophone from 1929, which is, I'm always amazed when I see kids walking through the exhibition and they're looking at this beautiful little gramophone, trying to understand how music is transferred from that little piece into the world. And so it's amazing to see how much technology has changed. And then you get to see everything from a photo album of the family from 1926 to 1942. These are the only surviving photos of those four people. At the same time, you're seeing the rise of Hitler and the Nazis, the last ballot that the German people got to vote in, where Hitler was the top of the ticket and the Nazi Party were the only ones you were able to vote for. That was in November of 1933. This is really a comprehensive look at how we personalize this experience, how we personalize this history, how we individualize this. It's not just about Anne, but of course Anne's story is what resonates with so many people. But you get to meet the others who are in hiding as well, and you get to learn more about those who endured and those who suffered.
The picture of the kindergarten class.
1935, 32 children in that class. 15 of them are Jewish. It's Amsterdam. It's a Montessori school. It's really, I think, it's the best of what society was at that moment. Innocent little children, and of course, 10 of them are murdered in concentration camps. And towards the end of the exhibition, we get an introduction to who those 10 children are.
Yeah, that was a really poignant moment. And I think also understanding that we see that number, 6 million Jews, 6 million Jews, but then when you see the statistics that it's more than 1 million children, it's for some reason that really hit me today in a different way.
1.5 million Jewish children murdered during the Holocaust. And if we look at Anne's story and Anne's experience, the Franks, the von Pels, for instance, Margot Frank and Anne Frank murdered at Bergen-Belsen, Peter von Pels murdered at Mauthausen. It's an example of how these children both tried to survive what they had to endure, how they struggled, and of course, their final days in Nazi concentration camps.
How difficult was it to recreate the annex?
Working with the Anne Frank House, and this being a presentation of the Anne Frank House, I would say less difficult than perhaps others would think. This is a meticulous recreation, and what's different here is that while every square inch of this space, from floor to ceiling, wall to wall, it's the same paint color, the same ceilings, the same wallpaper. The difference is that the rooms are furnished based on 1961 scaled models that Otto created, being able to help articulate and tell the story to others. What was in their space? How did they live? I would say difficult in that everything was built overseas, and that we had to transfer it here and meticulously recreate it, but also being able to go and obtain all of these pieces of furniture. They're all period pieces, part of the collection of the Anne Frank House. So being able to understand how to be as authentic as possible in the way in which that story is told.
So for example, the vases that we saw, or the blankets on the bed, those sort of pieces, are those archival too?
So those are all pieces from the 1920s and 1930s from the Netherlands. They've all been assembled to be able to help tell this story.
Is there anything in the annex as far as objects that you're only going to see here in the United States?
Well, one, all of that furniture you're only going to see here in the United States. There are pieces under glass all the way through. So in the first room where Otto and Edith and Margot spend their 2 years in hiding, you have Margot's Latin lessons. And these were lessons that she did essentially studying from afar. So under the name of one of the 6 helpers, these lessons were done where they were sent to a teacher. The teacher marked them up. You can see the red markings on these lessons. When the family is arrested, the helper writes to the teacher and says, "I'm no longer interested in doing these lessons." The teacher writes back and says, "But you are our very best student. Would you please reconsider?" That's an example of the sort of thing you'll only see here. When you go into Anne's room, you get to see Fritz Pfeffer's Spanish textbook. Fritz was a person who shared the room with Anne, and he was studying Spanish because he wanted to move to South America after the war. When you go into that next section, you're now on the third floor of the annex. You're moving through the space where the Von Pels lived, but also which was really the community. It was the room where all of them would gather during all waking hours because they needed to be as far away from the first floor where the factory was still in operation. You have Peter's 16th birthday present, which is a board game, kind of like a Dutch version of Monopoly. And you have Augusta von Pell's festive party dress in the closet in the far back section of that room. Augusta wanted to wear that dress when she had a reason to celebrate. These are examples of the sort of things that you see in the space that you do not see in Amsterdam.
Up until this point, this could have happened. I mean, the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam could have chosen to do this exhibit anytime over the last several decades. Why now? Why was it important to do now?
So the Anne Frank house was very much committed to being able to bring Anne's story to the US in a meaningful way. And for a while, there had been discussions about how that could happen. New York has played a really prominent role in the preservation and presentation of Anne's story, from Doubleday Press printing the diary, publishing the diary for the first time in 1952, Meyer Levin doing the quintessential book review on June 15th, 1952 for the New York Times, which essentially introduced Anne's diary to a world audience. The play going to Broadway in 1955, 56, and so on and so forth. I think it was a question of when was the time right to be able to do it. It obviously aligned with a really difficult time for the Jewish people worldwide. It has aligned with a rise in anti-Semitism here in New York and elsewhere around this country. And so part of what we set out to do was to tell the story in the most comprehensive way possible, connecting it to the place, which is obviously New York, and to be able to bring in audiences that would have an opportunity to experience this, perhaps either never having had the chance to go to Amsterdam and or being able to amplify what they learned when they were in Amsterdam.